Hello there, Tom Holyboot, that's your guy defense. Let's talk malfunctions. Namely, the ejection port looky-loo thing that I keep seeing people do just before they actually do anything. It's kind of a silly technique, and on a good day and on a bad day, it's a worthless technique and not super worth doing. Namely because 50% of your time is going to be spent in the dark, okay? You are going to be in the dark. So my question would be, what are you trying to see? If this is a home defense situation, which if you're a civilian, that's the most likely situation you'll be in and have a rifle in your hands, just like so, well, probably more like so, and you encounter a malfunction of some sort, I'm not entirely sure what you're supposed to see when it's dark. Okay? You have a problem, you click instead of bang, and then this is what you're going to do. Or dead trigger and instead of bang, and you're going to spend some time looking at this ejection port trying to figure out what went wrong. First off, you're not going to get a lot of information from the ejection port. If you have cartridges up back here, which I've seen happen, down inside there, which I've seen happen, wedged up in here, which I've seen happen, you're not really going to see it, and I'll go ahead and use this to kind of, you're not really going to see a whole lot from here. If you want a serious look, you're kind of going to have to drop it and actually take your full attention off of everything around you to actually see what the issue is. Because if you don't see it here, it's going to be back here. So it's kind of a silly technique. And it's going to drive away your focus and your attention on things. And if ever there was a time for that stupid phrase, situational awareness, to be around, this would be it. Now's not the time for gunsmithing, guys. So you ask, well, what's the solution? If I can't look at the problem, and we're assuming that slap and rack will not fix it, slap for AK, tap for everything else, what then is the solution? Well, I'm going to submit to you something I learned from my friend Sonny Pazikas. I teach it in my own classes, and it's not exactly super revolutionary, but the prescription for it should cover most of the problems you'll come across. He calls it DIRT, drop, rack, insert, rack, trigger. I call it skip ahead. And you would probably also know it as type 3 malfunction. At least I think it's called type 3. I don't really pay that close attention to what these things are called. Simply put, if for whatever reason I have dead trigger, nothing's going on, I don't need to look. I simply need to remove the magazine. If this is the only one you got, hold on to it. Rack, insert, rack, go back to work. That's all there is to it. You would also commonly know this as reload. And I don't know why we've overcomplicated this. Now it's gotten to the point where there's 2 or 3 different ways to deal with malfunctions, to the point that we've given them all different names, and we've gotten really super creative with it all. And there's no real point to it. Just reload your gun. That's all you have to do to correct most of the malfunctions. If the malfunction persists beyond that point, it is probably because, don't mind my dogs, is probably because the malfunction is much, much worse, and this has stopped being a gun and is now turned its life around and become hyper expensive baseball bat. And so that would be the suggestion on that. I don't know why, and I do look forward to the day it dies again. This ejection port look, again, in the dark, home invasion situation. I don't really need to be looking at this. I need to be focused. I need to get this thing working. What's wrong and what I call it and what I diagnose it, none of that matters. It's kind of like having major bleed in your leg. Does it really matter if it's femoral bleed or a main vein? No, there's a lot of the super vital red stuff that was inside of me now on the outside of me. And I really need that to stop. Does it really matter what type of malfunction I have? No, I really need this thing to work again. I don't really care what it's called, and I don't care about the malfunction's personality. It's a fuck, and I need it out of my way. Does that kind of follow along here? This goes back to what I was talking about in a previous video about instructors that aren't able to present relevant information, and they're just using stuff or teaching stuff that somebody else told them. I.e., they're just parroting information and not pondering information and thinking about it and saying, is this relevant to people? This is not relevant to me. Doing this, what does this help? And you'll notice when I talked about dry fire practice the other day, you don't actually need to touch the trigger, and therefore you don't actually need to unload your gun, because you should have proper stimuli and be cognizant and aware and paying attention and not automatic. When you train to do things automatically and you don't get the return stimulus, you start to repeat. You broken record it, okay? I see this all the time with tap and rack people and handguns, because they only practice the one way. So I'll just go ahead and unload this because I do intend to touch a trigger, okay? So for tap and rackers, right, they'll come, they'll tap, they'll rack, and it's still a dead trigger, and then they'll do it again, and then they'll do it again. Why? Because they didn't learn another way to do malfunction clearance. They didn't think or train or practice enough. They spent their entire time practicing with the one thing that works for really only 1 to 2 malfunction types. The third one it makes worse, and that's all they've got. They don't practice the other stuff, okay? So the same will be true for ejection port looking. If you are so accustomed in practice and in training to have the dead trigger and then look and not see, you're going to get stuck. You're going to have a mental hang-up. Seen it happen enough times that I can safely say probably should move on to other techniques or have the other techniques be baseline standard. It's one of those what I call universal skill sets. And what I mean by universal is I have yet to find a gun that this does not work on, okay? It's not to say that it's the greatest skill set, it's the one that seems to work the most frequently, the most commonly, and the most robustly. I do not care about the speed of a technique, I care for its robustness, okay? So anyways, I hope that helps someone.